Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IR Update. Today with us, we have Andrew Brodkey, Idaho Copper's Chief Executive Officer and COO. Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Amanda. Thank you.
So Idaho Copper's COMO project is described as one of the largest untapped copper, molybdenum, silver deposits in the U.S. Can you give us the high-level case for why the project matters and how you see it fitting through the looming copper supply deficit?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. First of all, the name of our project is CUMO, that's C-U-M-O, which stands for copper and molybdenum. The project has been around for quite a while. I became involved with CUMO and Idaho Copper about 3 years ago when I was recruited by the gentleman who's now our chief financial officer, who had a long history, or much longer history, with the project. This project is, to be honest with you, a very, very attractive, advanced, and very well located project. When we look at checking the boxes on a domestic, or basically any project, mining project around the world, you want to make sure that they're present. For example, location. We're in the US, we're in the state of Idaho. It's a mining state, very, very pro-mining, regulatory speaking, and workforce speaking, and it's got a long history as one of the mining states in the United States. We are located 37 miles north of the city of Boise. Boise is the capital of Idaho. It's home to about 1 million people in the valley, and the road access is very, very good. To be this close to a major have a major mine this close to a major city is not very usual. It does exist in places like Arizona and Tucson, where I spend a lot of time in my career. But here in Idaho, we're very, very well located. And like I said, we've got good access via state highways and then U.S. Forest Service roads to the site itself. You also want to make sure on checking these boxes that you have power, which we do, and water, which we do, and workforce. Idaho, as I mentioned, is a mining state, and the Treasure Valley, which is basically Boise, Idaho, has a trained workforce that would love to be able to eventually be deployed at this mine. So when you look at all these sorts of things you want to have in place, like I mentioned before, this project has it. It's an advanced project. It was discovered back in about the 1960s. It's adjacent to a very old gold district. In fact, the district where the old timers back in the 1880s and the 1890s forward began recovering gold, they took out about 2.5 million ounces of gold, actually more than the California gold rush at Sutter's Creek. So when you start looking at the history of this particular area, a lot of gold mining took place in the early years, but the project itself really was first envisioned as a copper molybdenum play in, like I mentioned, about the 1960, 1965 range. At that point in time, a company called AMAX, which was based in New York, did some initial exploration. Various other major companies and smaller companies came through until the most recent exploration was done starting in the mid-1990s by a company called Mosquito Consolidated Gold Mines, and they are our predecessor. They are, through a chain of title, the predecessor to Idaho Copper Corporation. The most recent drilling campaign was completed in 2012, and we have roughly, I'd say, about 100,000 feet of core drilling done. The depth of the holes went down to 3,000 feet to help identify the ore body, and we've had various iterations of technical documents, most recently a preliminary economic assessment, that's a PEA for people in the mining industry, that was published in 2020 by SRK. What we have here, what we've defined, and what we've been working with is a very, very large deposit. In terms of, and I'll throw out some terminology from the mining industry, in terms of measured and indicated resources plus inferred resources, we've got identified, geologically speaking, over 8 billion pounds of copper, 3.5 billion pounds of molybdenum, and over 400 million ounces of silver, plus rhenium, plus tungsten. So if you look at this as a multi-metal project, which it is, we offer metals that are currently considered to be critical by the Department of the Interior in their new list, their critical minerals list, and the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense. Everything except molybdenum is either a critical metal or a critical material, and molybdenum should be eventually, I think, included in those lists as well, for reasons I think we'll talk about a little bit later. But back to your original question, Amanda, why is this project important, and why is it? Well, it's important because we have these metals that are critical. We have these metals that are needed that can't be replaced with other metals that are needed in the supply chain in the United States. The current administration, the Trump administration, is emphasizing the need for finding it here, developing it here, producing it here, and consuming it here. That's all really the focus of this administration. And we fall with this big project right in what I would say the wheelhouse of what they're trying to do. Everything domestically focused, so we don't have to keep relying on imports. The most recent information, depending upon which analysts you look at, believe that projection-wise that copper is growing anywhere between, consumption of copper worldwide, anywhere between 2.5% to 3.5% per year, and molybdenum, similar numbers. And problem is we don't have the mines worldwide, and particularly even here in the US, to make up for all this deficit. So when you find a project of this size that has the ability to contribute substantially to the supply chain for particularly copper and for molybdenum, the two major minerals that we've got, and silver for that matter, when you have a project of this size and this location and all these good attributes, this is a type of project really that should be advanced in the US, and that's why I'm involved with it.
Great. In March, the U.S. Forest Service issued a decision notice and finding of no significant impact for your 4-year exploration plan. So what does this milestone mean for Idaho Copper, and how are you preparing for the exploration program to begin?
Let me start by saying that the 2020 PEA I mentioned, that document left some holes open that needed to be filled. That document was produced a couple of years before I joined the company. When I became the chief operating officer of the company, I knew that we had to make some improvements on that document. Some of the things that we needed to do were some additional exploration. As I mentioned, the last drilling campaign took place and was finished in 2012. Since that time, and again, before I became associated with the company submitted plans to the U.S. Forest Service, because we're on federal land principally, to do additional drilling. That drilling and those plans have been consistently objected to and challenged by the NGOs, the environmental groups, culminating with 2 lawsuits, one in 2014 and one in 2016, that bring us to where we are today. There's been no drilling for over a decade because of the environmental opposition to the project itself. So the Forest Service published in March of this year, as you mentioned, a finding of no significant impact, which we call a FONSI for short, and a decision notice which allowed the company to go ahead and said, you can now do your additional drilling. We need that information so that we can get a better handle on the geological characteristics, the size of the ore body, and move it on to its next stage. Again, we're at a stage called Preliminary Economic Assessment, PEA. The next stage is in the mining business is called the Preliminary Feasibility Study. That's a PFS. And then we go on to a bankable feasibility study. But the BFS and the PFS are a couple of years down the road. We still need to do our drilling to actually supply the information necessary for the preliminary feasibility work. Well, that was a great decision in March, but in June of this year, the environmental groups sued us yet again to stop our drilling. So in 2025, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get out onto the site and do any drilling. Our permits say that we can drill, our season runs from April 15th to December 15th, but because of the lawsuit and until we get that resolved, we won't be out on the site. It'll be 20 and 26 before that's resolved. However, we think that in this case, all the items that are being complained of and challenged by the environmental groups have already been litigated. There's nothing really new that they presented to the court. So we're going to obviously defend well, first we need to intervene because the company, the NGO sued the Forest Service, not us, but the company wants to intervene, become a part of this because we want to get out and finish our drilling and then move on to our next stage, which is the PFS, as I mentioned before. Bottom line, we're happy with the decision of the Forest Service. They put hundreds of thousands of man hours into compiling the record, individual technical reports from specialists, from botanists to plant specialists, botanists to wildlife people to hydrological people. I mean, you go down the list of everything they did. There are a couple thousand pages of documents in the record in the technical support for the decision that they came to, which said we can complete our drilling. And the bottom line here is that our drilling is not going to impact the environment in any material way. We have dozens of what are called mitigation measures. We have to look out for a sensitive plant species, and we have to make sure that any spills we have are cleaned up and contained. These are normal sort of day-to-day items that any mining company has to deal with. But what I will tell you is that when this is all said and done, I think we're going to be drilling in 2026. That's my realistic hope.
Very good. You've highlighted ore sorting technology as a way to improve grades, reduce mill size, and lower capital intensity. How central is ore sorting to Kumho's economics, and what results have you seen so far from your evaluations and testing?
It's the key to making this project work. If you go back to the 2020 document that I mentioned, the PEA that was published, the author was SRK out of Canada, you'll see that the economic results were sort of what I would say ho hum. They weren't fabulous, and part of the reason was that SRK presented a report that required $3.1 billion of initial capital to build a 150,000 ton a day concentrator. That's a mill. When we looked at that, and when I first became involved, it became apparent to me that the mill was processing virtually everything that was being mined. So I'll play mining engineer. I am a mining engineer, by the way. So I'll give you my 2 cents worth of what we really needed to do. We needed to cut down the size of the mill and get the capex down to make this project a lot more favorable economically. Ore sorting is a technology that's been around since probably the 1970s, but it's been refined, and there's been a lot of more recent, I would say, exploration into the use of ore sorting worldwide. There are probably over 100 mines globally today that use some form of ore sorting. Ore sorting basically is the ability to separate higher grade ore from waste and lower grade ore. It's nothing really more than that. It's being able to use technologies that are available today and those that are being developed to hive off, if you will, the better grades to send them to the mill so that you are processing smaller amounts of volume and getting almost the same amount of metal out of the back end. What we did in 2024 was a number of different test work projects that proved that ore sorting really is amenable and workable for our type of deposit at Kumho. It doesn't work with every deposit. Let me talk geologically just for a second. Kumho is a copper molybdenum porphyry. Porphyry is a generic form of deposits, geologic deposit that talks about mineralization that comes up magmatically from an intrusion and then is disseminated. The typical porphyry, you'll find the grades of the material and the dissemination are somewhat constant throughout the whole ore body. But in a porphyry like we have, it's not a garden variety type porphyry. Our copper molybdenum porphyry is what we call stockwork. So instead of having everything sort of evenly distributed throughout the whole ore body, we have individual, what I would call stringers or thin veins that carry almost all the metal. So what you would envision yourself doing in the room you're in right now, picture the room you're in and you have maybe 5 or 6 finger width veins going through your room, and those contain all the metals. So the key is finding those and separating all the metals that are in those little tiny veins out from the rest, which is considered to be waste or very low grade material. The type of ore sorting test work that we did in 2024 was based on XRF, which is X-ray fluorescence. We had mobile units come up and they scanned about 35,000 feet of our core to give us detailed information on what we call the variability of the ore body. In a typical porphyry, the ore body is somewhat homogeneous, so the mineralization again is somewhat evenly spread. In a variable ore body, it's heterogeneous, so these little veins that are easily distinguishable from the rest of the material carrying all the metals, that's what you try to find. And our ore body showed up to be variable, showed up to be heterogeneous. In addition, we sent a number of our samples up to an ore sorting specialty firm in Vancouver, BC, who ran the test work we needed to prove that our ore body is, and COO geology is amenable, our ore is amenable to sorting. Through a number of different tests, both using what we call bucket sensors, so that their simulations simulated a shovel picking up blasted material. The ore runs past the sensors and are able to tell you what the grade is. Once you decide where you're going to make your cutoff, so like if I have a 0.5% copper, that's my cutoff. Anything above that is what I want to send to the mill. Those sensors will tell you that that bucket full of material goes to the concentrator. Anything less than that, the next bucket, if it's less than that cutoff grade, it's waste or it goes someplace else. So that's the key of ore sorting and separation. And the conclusion of the group that we hired, which was called MineSense, by the way, they have installations with almost all the major mining companies throughout the world using their ore sorting technology. Their conclusion was that our ore at COO is amenable to sorting, and that's exactly what we wanted to hear. So that work in 2024 led us to this year, to 2025. We are in the process of putting together an updated preliminary economic assessment that takes into account the ability to ore sort. So our goal, contrasting this with 2020, in 2025 is to not take 150,000 ton a day mill. We're going to be offering something that's going to be on the order of 25 to 30,000 tons a day. Brings the initial capital down considerably. We're also looking at other ways to what I would say diminish the overall initial capital. And our target is going to be a little more than, call it, $1 billion. So instead of $3 billion, we're looking at $1 billion. That makes the economics run considerably better than in 2020 and makes this project what I would call a very, very superlative project. Once we implement not only ore sorting, but other tweaks, if you will, to the pit itself, the pit phases, the stripping. There's I would say, a laundry list of modifications that we're making from the 2020 document, contrasting with the 2020 document, that lead us to a great result, which we hope to have published by the end of this year.
Very good. Idaho Copper has also taken a leading role in advocating for molybdenum's inclusion on the U.S. critical minerals list. Why is this designation important for COO, and what progress are you seeing in policy discussions at the federal level?
Yeah, I would say that we're part of an industry group, let's say, that has done the work for the lobbying in Washington, D.C., and we're by no means the leader. But I would say that the results have been very positive. In 2025, and just last month in August 2025, the U.S. Geological Survey, part of the Department of Interior, published a revised critical minerals list. The lobbying effort had been ongoing for probably 3 years to put copper on the list, and there had been a lot of resistance. Once the administration changed, that resistance evaporated, and now copper is on the list. Molybdenum still is not, and molybdenum is not on either the USGS list, and it's not actually listed as a critical material under DOD or DOE regulations yet either. But from our perspective, it would be great to have moly. We call it molybdenum moly for short. It would be great to have it listed, but it's not essential, largely because all the other metals that we have are on the list itself. The reason why these are important is because it allows for the possibility of obtaining federal grant money or federal loan guarantees when your project is built. We are in the process of completing a white paper that will be submitted to the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy asking for help with, I mentioned this before, our pre-feasibility study, the PFS. The rules that the federal government agencies currently work under allow a company to obtain potentially defray half of the cost of even exploration type programs. So we're beyond exploration. We're really into, like I said, pre-feasibility, but those monies would be important. And there's a lot of precedent in Idaho for other companies and throughout the West too, for other mining companies obtaining the ability to access federal monies. In fact, you'll see that federal monies from the DOE and the DOD are going even to offshore projects. There's a project I think it's in the Yukon, a tungsten project. It's a Canadian company, and DOE monies are going to that project. We have tungsten. Tungsten's a critical mineral and a critical metal. So when you look at the uses of some of these really important metals, particularly for the Department of Defense purposes, tungsten and uranium and copper, we believe we've got a really, really strong case to be able to submit a white paper and access this federal funding. So the bottom line, I guess, circling back to your original question, it would be great to have molybdenum on the list. Even without molybdenum on the list, we have all the other metals that are going to theoretically qualify us to obtain federal funding in a very short order.
Very good. Looking long term, given the scale of Cuma's resources in copper, molybdenum, and silver, how do you envision the project's role in the U.S. strategic supply chains, whether in defense, clean energy, or advanced manufacturing, once it moves beyond exploration?
I wish I could tell you exactly when we're going to be in production. A lot of that is a function of the lawsuits that we face, like any mining company faces here in the U.S., particularly when you're on federal land, as we are. I mentioned earlier that I believe we're going to be able to complete our drilling in 2026. Beyond that, we'll move to our pre-feasibility study. We'll contemporaneously be undertaking our baseline environmental work, everything that we're going to be needing to complete an environmental impact statement, an EIS. The EIS plus all the other data and our preliminary engineering will feed into our bankable feasibility study, BFS, bankable feasibility. That will be, I'm hoping, sometime by 2028, 2029 timeframe. Once that is all together and we've submitted our EIS to the Forest Service, and let's assume we get a positive decision from the Forest Service. Subject to a lawsuit, we could theoretically be breaking ground by the very, very end of this decade, or maybe 2031. What does it mean for the U.S.? The amount of copper we're going to be producing, even under the most, I would say, optimistic circumstances, isn't going to be a gigantic amount. It'll be, I can only give you some preliminary numbers. It may be on the order of 40 to 50 million pounds a year. It's not going to be a gigantic amount, but the molybdenum portion is going to be very, very large. It should be the largest molybdenum producer in the country. As I mentioned before, molybdenum worldwide, and we've touted the project because we believe it to be the largest undeveloped source of molybdenum in the world. 3.5 billion pounds of molybdenum is a huge resource. And I don't know of any other project today worldwide that has that much of a resource available. So we'd be contributing to some various and very important supply chains in the US. The uses of molybdenum, for example, are for high-strength tensile anti-corrosive steel, very super alloys that are used in fighter jets and in defense industries, and used in desalination plants. Molybdenum is an incredibly important metal to be used in various forms of steel, for which this country really needs as we move into the future. I think everybody understands what copper is used for. The EVs, the wind and solar power generation units, as well as now off-grid battery electric storage. So copper is not going away, moly's not going away. Silver is used industrially in many other applications. And I mentioned before, rhenium and tungsten. The tungsten is incredibly important for the defense industry, as is rhenium. So we would be contributing, I think, material amounts once we're in production to the supply chains domestically. We'd be processing it here, developing it here, processing it here, and selling it here for domestic consumption. Everything, again, in keeping with what this current administration's focus is for the mining industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all the information. It was a pleasure having you today.
Okay, thank you, Amanda.